Family always told me my brother was the golden child because he was smart. But later I discovered they were covering up his criminal record and multiple arrests while blaming me for every small mistake I ever made growing up. The golden child, that's what they always called him. Even though they didn't say it in so many words, you could see it in the way they looked at him. The way my mom's voice softened whenever she spoke his name. The way my dad would brag to neighbors about his report cards. And the way my relatives would pat me on the head and say, "You'll get there someday." I was the someday kid, the one who was always playing catch-up, while my brother Michael was already way ahead. At least that's what they made me think. I still burned from being compared to him at every opportunity. Like when I brought home a B+ in math and my mom sighed this sigh like I'd let her down for the day, saying, "If only you worked like Michael." He'd be there, attempting to pretend he hadn't heard, like he was really interested in a book or calculating something on his calculator. But the grin on his face gave him away every time. I felt diminutive, as though my whole life was a reminder of how more intelligent he was. I even started to believe it myself, that maybe I actually was lazy or stupid or not enough. I carried that weight every day, trying to fix it, trying to be the child that they wanted, but no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And then one night, years later, everything opened up, and I found the golden boy wasn't what I had thought, and the truth revealed made me feel sick. It started with a phone call. I was in my bedroom, surfing my laptop, just another boring Tuesday, when I heard my mom's voice downstairs, panicked and cutting. I'd never heard her so scared, not even when my grandmother got sick. I crept halfway down the stairs and overheard snippets. Words like, "station, bail," and, "not again." My heart sank. Not again? What did that mean? I paused on the stairs, listening to her whispering frantically on the phone, asking how much it was going to cost, begging them not to call Dad at work. And that's when I realized she wasn't on the phone with a doctor or a hospital. She was on the phone with the police station. My brother's name dropped from her mouth amidst her frantic sentences, and the universe I thought I knew tilted on its axis. Michael, my inviolable, perfect brother. What was he doing in a police station? I should have burst in, demanded answers, but I didn't. I stayed hidden, shaking, heartbeat racing, because part of me was afraid to hear the truth. Later that night, after she had left in such a hurry, I tried to piece things together, but the house was so quiet it was mocking me. I snuck into Michael's room, which I never did because it always felt like his own kingdom. It smelled of cologne and paper, sharp and cold. There were a stack of envelopes on his desk, nothing unusual, except one was partly open, and my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out. It was not a college acceptance letter or honor roll certificate or anything I had dreamed. It was a court document. I stared at it, my eyes running over words like possession, arrested, and probation. My whole body went numb. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I remember sitting on the edge of his bed, trying to wrap my head around it. My brother, the golden child, was a criminal, and everybody knew but me. All those years of getting blamed for the smallest of things, like not doing the dishes or being 5 minutes late for curfew, while Michael was out getting arrested. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to interrogate my parents for making me believe that I was the failure, and they were covering up for his messes. The one memory that hit me the hardest was from a few years back. I'd been grounded for 2 weeks because I supposedly scratched Dad's car when I reversed out of the driveway. I denied it under oath it wasn't me, but no one believed me. Michael had been in before me, yet my parents did not even question him at all. They said that I was lying, attempting to pass the blame. I cried in my room for hours begging them to believe me, but they wouldn't. And there, with that court document in my hand, I wondered, how many times had they chosen to make me the issue in order to save him? That evening, when my mom eventually returned with him, I said nothing. I just stood upstairs and watched. He was ashen, tired, but not shamed. My mom coddled him like he'd lost something instead of caused it. And when she finally glanced up and noticed me standing there, she came to a halt. Her widening eyes said everything. She knew that I knew. And for the first time, she had no words at the ready to try to make me feel small. It was as though she wanted to speak, to inform me, but she just turned and took Michael to his bedroom. I went back to my own and sat in the dark, staring at that court record, with the sense that my whole life had been a cleverly constructed illusion. I didn't sleep that night, no matter how hard I tried. My mind kept running through each moment of my childhood, each argument, each scolding, each and every time I'd been told to be more like Michael. And now all I could do was stare at that piece of paper in my hand, the reality that no one had even bothered to inform me of, like I was some sort of stranger to my own family, someone who wasn't worthy enough to know what was truly going on. And the more I thought about it, the more angry I became, not only at him, but at them, my parents, for lying to me for all these years. The next morning, at breakfast, the silence was thick, and not a word was mentioned of the night's activities. Michael sat across from me, sipping his coffee as though everything was normal, as though he had not been in a holding cell just hours earlier. My mom fluttered around, presenting him with more toast, fussing like a servant, while my dad was sitting with his paper open, though I knew he wasn't really reading it. I stirred my cereal, waiting for someone to see it, to at least pretend like they respected me enough to give me the truth, but it was silence, heavy and deliberate. At last I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper initially. "So, is nobody going to mention last night?" My mom stopped dead in her tracks, her back still facing me, and my dad gradually dropped his paper. Michael did not so much as twitch. He simply smirked, the identical smirk I had endured growing up when I got in trouble and he got a free pass. My father coughed and said, "It's none of your business. That's all. None of my business." I wanted to scream right there, knock over the table, demand to know how brushing my brother's offenses under the carpet and blaming me for forgetting to take out the trash was fair, but the words stuck in my throat. I pushed my chair backward instead, so that it screeched on the floor, and walked out. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my knees drawn to my chest, shaking with rage. I realized then that my family never, ever treated me like an equal. I wasn't their child the same way Michael was. I was just there, simple to blame, nowhere to be found when it mattered, and consider me and mine to be disposable whenever they needed a scapegoat. That understanding stung more than anything else. I was remembering all those times I'd been unjustly punished, and now they had sickening sense. Like the summer I'd been grounded when money went missing from Dad's wallet. I'd cried, begged them to believe me, even offered to let them search my room. But they did not. They told me I had to stop lying, and that I was stealing so that I could go out with friends. I did not even have any friends close enough then. Now I looked back and wondered, was it Michael? Was he the one stealing money, knowing I'd get the blame? And the scary thing was, it all added up. It all made sense. Later that week, I tried again to confront them. I marched into the living room where my mom was folding laundry, and I just blurted it out. "Why do you defend him? Why do you lie for him and treat me like dirt?" My voice cracked, my hands trembled, but I didn't care. My mom's hands stilled, clutching one of Michael's shirts, her eyes darting back and forth like she'd been caught. She whispered, "You don't understand, he's been through enough." I felt like laughing. Through enough? What about me? What about years of being stifled by their comparisons, of being told I'd never be good enough? I said as much to her, my voice rising until I was nearly shouting. She begged me to lower my voice, scared Dad would hear. "You'll only make it worse," she hissed. And that's when it clicked. They weren't defending Michael because they believed he was good. They were defending him because they were ashamed. They didn't want anyone else to know their golden boy was actually broken, so they shoved the blame onto me to keep up the illusion. I remember having this sinking sensation in my stomach, like everything in my childhood had been staged, manipulated, warped to keep their golden son looking perfect. That night, I overheard Michael talking to a friend on the phone in his bedroom. I was not trying to listen, but his voice carried through the walls. He laughed at being caught, laughed at how Mom always bails me out. I had this cold shiver run down my spine. He wasn't even sorry, not once. He was proud of it. And that is when the anger started to distill into something heavier, sadness. Because if he didn't care, and they didn't care, then what did that make me? It was nothing but the punching bag, the supporting actor in another person's life. The following days were unbearable. Anything small I did incorrectly, left a glass in the sink, didn't switch off a light, was met with a sigh, a lecture, even screaming, while Michael went out and returned whenever he pleased, and no one said anything. I was stuck in some twisted drama where the script always read against me. I stopped attempting to gain their approval, because I finally understood. I was never supposed to. I was supposed to be the shadow, the diversion, the one who absorbed the hits so Michael's reputation stayed spotless. That realization stung, but it also hardened me. For the first time, I wasn't just depressed. I was done. I started pulling away after that, not in some dramatic teenage rebellion way, but quietly, little by little, like my heart just didn't have the energy to keep trying anymore. I stopped telling them about school, stopped sharing the things I cared about, because what was the point if they were only going to turn the conversation back to Michael anyway? And they noticed, but not necessarily the way you might think. Rather than asking me if I was alright, they informed me that I was getting attitude. "You're always so sulky," my dad said at one dinner when I barely said a word. I wished I could stare him straight in the eye and say, "Because I'm drowning in this house and nobody even cares," but I gritted my teeth. It wasn't worth it. My silence became my protection. Meanwhile, Michael just did as he wanted. Sometimes he did not even come home at all, and when he did, my parents played relieved, as if he'd been in some mortal peril and not out clubbing or, it appeared, getting into trouble. I waited and waited for them to see him, finally, in the light, to stop fantasizing that he was this magnificent prodigy. But they doubled their efforts instead. The more the cracks started forming, the more they struggled to tape them up with excuses, and I became more invisible each day. What actually snapped me, though, was when I heard of the second arrest. This time not for drug possession, for theft. I overheard my dad on the phone, talking in hushed tones about lawyers and keeping it quiet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Stealing. My perfect brother was stealing now. And instead of punishing him, my parents were going out of their way to cover it up. That night, when Michael came home, I ambushed him in the hallway. My own voice was shaking, but I was able to push the words out. "Why do you keep doing that? Don't you care what you're putting us through?" He gave me this cold, almost bored expression and said, "Why do you care? You're not the one they have hopes of." That hurt me like a punch to the ribcage. He was right, in his twisted way. I wasn't being pressured, because they didn't have an expectation of what I could be. They expected me to fail, to be the issue. And he was okay with it being on me, because it kept him safe. I just stood there, in shock, and he brushed past me like I wasn't even there. I cried myself to bed that night, not just because of him, but because of the way my parents let it happen, how they'd rather deceive themselves rather than face the truth. The next day, I just finally broke. In the morning, I told them that I knew everything. I laid it all out there, the arrests, the court papers, the stolen money, the whole thing. My voice shook, but I didn't care. They needed to listen. My mom wept uncontrollably, begging me to be quiet, and my dad's face turned red with anger. "You have no idea what you're saying," he snarled. But I did know. I had proof. I said I'd overheard the phone calls, I'd read the papers. The room was quiet. For a moment, I prayed that maybe, just maybe, they'd admit it, that we could finally stop living in this twisted lie. But my dad just slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "You will never speak of this again. Do you hear me?" His voice was so loud that it shocked me. My mother sobbed harder, begging him to calm down, as Michael sat there with that same smug look, like he was beyond criticism. I knew something broke inside of me then, like the last thread of hope I'd been holding on to had finally snapped. I knew they were never going to come clean about it. They were never going to play it square with me. Having Michael's safety was more vital than telling me the truth. I stood up from the table without another thing, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door. I didn't even have a place to go. I just needed fresh air. I walked for hours, coming to an understanding of how much of my childhood I had lost trying to win the approval of people who had already eliminated it. I was worth it. That was the day that I made up my mind to stop looking for their approval. I'd stop begging for scraps of attention that were never happening. It stung like a mother, but somehow, ironically, it was freeing. If I wasn't their golden child, well, so be it. I'd make my own light. Withdrawing wasn't simple though. When you've had your whole life spent training yourself to look for acceptance, to fight to receive the smallest morsels of recognition, to leave it all behind is to cut out your own lifeline. I felt guilty at first, like I was leaving them behind, like I was abandoning my own family just for trying to survive without begging for their love. It was my mom who noticed the change first. She'd appear on my doorstep in the late evening with some made-up tale of washing or asking if I wanted a cup of tea. But I could see it in her eyes. She was afraid that I was leaving, and I was, not because I wanted to, but because I had to, if I was to keep any kind of self for myself. Michael, however, barely appeared to register. Or maybe he did, but he didn't mind. His world was a bubble of second chances and blind forgiveness, and whether I did or did not do this or that was of no concern to him. And still, I waited in secret for the day when they would finally see him for what he was. That day came, but never as I had ever imagined. It was about a year later that the knock on the door came, hard and adamant. 2 officers stood there, and no late-night phone call, no furious drive at midnight. This time, it was public. Michael had been arrested again, but this time not for possession or theft. This time it was serious. He had been caught breaking into a house with a group of guys, and the charges were not going to be dropped. My parents' faces twisted in the officer's explanation, their perfect golden child marred by something too big to hide. I saw them break their painstakingly fabricated lie shattering around them, and instead of being pleased, I was just tired. I had expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy, that they would no longer be able to continue lying, that the truth was literally staring them in the face. But all I could sense was this overwhelming sadness, because even after all that he had done to hurt me, Michael was still my brother. I didn't want him to ruin his life. I just wanted my family to not sacrifice me for him anymore. But still, even as the officers took him away, my mother looked at me and tears were streaming down her face and she whispered, "Don't tell anyone." These words stung worse than anything. Even in the midst of his ultimate failure, she was still more concerned about the secrecy of the truth than facing it. I knew then that nothing I said or did would ever change their loyalty. It had never been about right and wrong. It had never been about fair. It had been about them needing to protect the image of him they built, no matter how seedy it really was. That's when I realized I needed to leave. Not in some dramatic runaway style, but a slow, thoughtful plan to build a life that wasn't inextricably linked to theirs. I had worked part-time, saved as much as I could, and applied to schools away from home. As I finally left, bag in hand, my mom held on to me as though she was afraid I would not come back, and my dad just nodded gruffly. Michael did not even appear to say goodbye, and maybe that was right. And at school, for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. No one compared me to anyone else. No one told me I wasn't enough. I had people who saw me for what I was, not for what I wasn't, and I started to let myself think that maybe I wasn't the failure I'd been made to feel like I was. But the scars linger. Every time I deny my own good sense, every time I distrust myself, I can hear them in my head, telling me that I was not good enough. But I am silencing them. I am silencing their lies and telling myself my own story. Sometimes, when I look back, I think about what could have been had they spoken truthfully from the start. If only they'd let Michael own up to his mistakes instead of me being the family scapegoat. Maybe he would not have gone so out of bounds. Maybe he would not have been in and out of jail, flushing out the potential they were so desperate to preserve. And maybe I would not have grown up feeling like a ghost in my own home. But that's history. That's done. I can do nothing to reverse it. I can only carry the lessons on. The biggest one? Family is not blood. It's who sees you, who you care about, who chooses to treat you with dignity and compassion. I didn't have that when I was a kid, but I can give that to myself now. I can build it in the relationships I form, the people I let into my life. And for my brother, I have no idea where he will be. I don't hate him, even after everything. I just hope one day he realizes the damage he's done. Not just to himself, but to me, too. For now, though, I'm finally free of the weight of his shadow. I'm no longer the scapegoat, no longer the background character in someone else's story. Undefined, I'm learning to stand in my own light, even if it took me years to get here. And that, more than anything else, is enough.